In the year 578, a craftsman arrived in Japan to build a temple. The company he founded to do it would outlive emperors, samurai, shoguns, 2 atomic bombs, and 40 generations of his own family. It would survive for 1,400 years, and then, in a single decade, it would die. Not from war, not from disaster, from alone.
This is the story of Kongo Gumi, the oldest continuously operating company in human history, and how the most stable business the world has ever seen destroyed itself the moment it forgot what it was. It is hard to feel how long 14 centuries really is. So try this. When Kongo Gumi opened its doors, the Prophet Muhammad had not yet been born. There were no Vikings. There was no England, no France, no Oxford, no Ottoman Empire, no printing press. The company was already 1,000 years old before Shakespeare wrote a single line. It watched the entire modern world be invented from the outside, while quietly doing the same job the whole time.
To understand how it began, you have to understand that in 6th century Japan, a religion could start a war. Buddhism had just arrived from the mainland, and it split the country. One powerful clan, the Soga, embraced the new faith. Another, the Mononobe, saw it as an insult to Japan's own gods. The disagreement did not stay a disagreement. It became a battle for the future of the nation.
On the Soga side rode a young prince named Shotoku. The story goes that on the eve of the deciding battle, with the outcome far from certain, he made a vow. If the Buddhist side won, he would build a great temple to the 4 heavenly kings, the guardians of the Buddhist world. His side won. Now the prince had a war to honor, a new faith to prove, and a promise to keep. There was only one problem. No one in Japan knew how to build what he had imagined. So he did what powerful men have always done when they lack something. He imported it. From the kingdom of Baekje on the Korean peninsula, Japan invited master temple builders who carried techniques centuries ahead of anything on the islands. Among them was a man whose name the company still carries today, Shigemitsu Kongo. He did not come to visit. He came to build something that had never existed in Japan and to found the enterprise that would build it.
In 593, they completed it. Shiten Noji, one of the first great state temples in Japan. It still stands in Osaka today. It has burned down, been struck by lightning, and been bombed flat more than once across the centuries, and every single time it was rebuilt. And the family that first raised it did not go home, they stayed. And they became the keepers of a very specific, very rare kind of knowledge, how to build Japanese temples that last 1,000 years.
Here is what made Kongo Gumi almost impossible to replace. Their temples used no nails. The great timbers were locked together with interlocking wooden joints, carved so precisely that the whole structure could breathe. When the ground shook, and in Japan the ground always shakes, the building was designed to flex, sway, and settle back into place instead of snapping. A nail rusts and fails. A perfect joint, cut by hand, can hold for 1,000 years.
This was not something you learned in a season. A Kongo Gumi carpenter trained for decades. You started as a boy sweeping the workshop, and you spent years just watching, sharpening tools, and carving joints that would be thrown away because they were not yet perfect. The knowledge did not live in a manual. It lived in the hands of the master, and it passed to the apprentice the only way it could. Slowly, in person, on the job, one cut at a time, for a millennium. And because they never fully wrote it down, no rival could simply read the method and undercut them. You could not outsource it. You could not rush it. You could not buy it. In the language of business,
Kongo Gumi had something almost no company ever truly achieves: a real moat. A skill so deep and so rare that for over 1,000 years, if you wanted a temple that would outlive you and your grandchildren, there was really only one name.
There is a Japanese word for this kind of person: the shokunin, the artisan whose entire identity is the pursuit of doing one thing perfectly, not for riches, but because the work itself demands it. Kongo Gumi was never really a company in the way we mean it today. It was a family that had decided 40 generations deep that its purpose was singular: to raise buildings worthy of the gods, and to still be doing it 1,000 years later. Everything else, the money, the size, the ambition, was secondary to the craft.
Surviving 14 centuries is not luck. Kongo Gumi did specific, deliberate things. The first was flexibility about family. In a country obsessed with bloodline, they made a radical choice. The craft mattered more than the name. If a son was not capable, they would pass leadership to a daughter or adopt a skilled son-in-law, give him the Kongo name, and make him the heir. For 40 generations, they optimized for the one thing that actually kept them alive: not blood, skill.
At some point, generations deep, a family leader did something remarkable. He carved the company's philosophy into a set of precepts, a creed for every heir who would ever run the business. Be respectful, stay humble, deal fairly with others, do not drink to excess, read the times. And buried in that ancient list of rules, one warning that would echo across the centuries with unbearable irony: do not overreach. Do not take on more than the house can carry.
The second thing they did was bend without breaking. Through the chaos of the warring states, when Japan tore itself apart, they kept building. When the Meiji government turned against Buddhism and temple work dried up, they did not panic. They diversified, took on other kinds of construction, even made coffins to survive the lean years, and then returned to temples the moment the market came back. They stayed small, they stayed focused, they refused to become something they were not.
Then came the 20th century, and the ultimate test. In 1945, in the final months of the Second World War, American firebombs fell on Osaka and burned Shitennoji, the founding temple, to the ground. The building that had launched the company 1,400 years earlier was ash. And Kongo Gumi did what it had always done. It rebuilt it. Fire, war, an empire's collapse, the atomic age itself. And still, the one thing they did better than anyone alive.
Think about what that means. Every empire you have ever read about rose and fell inside the lifespan of this one company. The Byzantines, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the British Empire at its height. Kongo Gumi outlasted all of them, not by being the biggest or the boldest, but by knowing exactly what it was and never letting go of it. For over 1,000 years, that was enough. And then, at the very end, it let go.
The 1980s. Japan was not just booming, it was levitating. The economy looked unstoppable. And the strangest thing of all was the land. Property prices climbed so high that at the peak, the small patch of ground under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo was said to be worth more than the entire state of California. Money was cheap, banks were desperate to lend, and everyone believed the same beautiful lie, that prices only ever go up.
And Kongo Gumi, the company that had survived 1,000 years by refusing to be anything other than temple builders, looked at that boom. It saw everyone around it getting rich on real estate, effortlessly, while it made its careful money one temple at a time. And for the first time in 40 generations,
It broke its own oldest rule. It borrowed heavily against the future, and it bet that money on real estate.
It is easy to judge them, but understand the pressure they were under. All across Japan, the most respectable, conservative companies were doing exactly the same thing. There was even a name for it: Zytec, financial engineering, making money from money instead of from what you built. Firms that had spent a century being careful watched their patient profits look foolish next to neighbors getting rich overnight, doing nothing. For a proud house that had guarded its name for 1,400 years, standing still while everyone else soared did not feel like discipline anymore. It felt like being left behind.
For a few years, it worked. Exactly the way it worked for everyone. On paper, they were richer than ever. And then, in the early 1990s, the bubble burst. Japanese property values did not dip, they collapsed, and kept collapsing for years, in what Japan still calls the lost decade. The land Kongo Gumi had bought was suddenly worth a fraction of what they paid, but the loans they had signed for it did not shrink. The debt stayed exactly as large as the day they took it on. And here is where it turned fatal. At the exact moment the debt became a stone around their neck, their real business was quietly dying underneath them. Modern Japan was building fewer temples every year. The irreplaceable craft, the 1,000-year moat, was now serving a shrinking market. Less money was coming in from the thing they were great at, while an ever heavier debt from the thing they never understood pressed down from above. A company can survive one of those. Almost none survive both at once.
By 2006, the math was final. Kongo Gumi, after 1,428 years, could no longer carry what it owed. The last family president watched the company his ancestors had guarded since the 6th century get absorbed as a subsidiary of a large modern construction firm. The name Kongo Gumi survived on paper. The thing that had actually lasted 14 centuries, its independence, did not. The oldest company on Earth ended, not with a catastrophe, but with a balance sheet.
The man who had to sign it away was Masakazu Kongo, the 40th generation to lead the family, and the last. He had inherited a company older than most nations, and on his watch, he watched it slip out of the family's hands forever. Later, asked what had gone wrong, his answer was not complicated. They had drifted from the temple work that defined them. They had borrowed against land in a market they never truly understood. The lesson he was left holding was the very same one his own ancestors had carved into wood centuries before he was born.
So what actually killed Kongo Gumi? Not the earthquakes it was engineered to survive. Not the fires that took its temples again and again. Not the wars. Not the bomb. Not the fall of the empires it quietly outlived. What killed the oldest company on Earth was a choice. The choice to leave the one thing it was best at. To chase a boom it did not understand. With money it did not have. And the cruelest detail is the one we started with. Centuries before the bubble, one of their own ancestors had carved the warning into the family creed. Do not overreach. Do not take on more than the house can carry. They had written down the exact rule that would have saved them, and then in one confident decade, they forgot to read it. The lesson is quietly brutal. A moat protects you only while you stand inside it. Kongo Gumi survived 1,000 years by knowing exactly what it was, and it died the decade it decided to be something else. The debt did not care that the company was 14 centuries old. The land did not fall more gently because a family had guarded it for 40 generations. The math is never impressed by your history. Here is the part that should sit with you. Most companies do not die old.
The average business lasts a decade or two before it fades, gets swallowed, or simply gives up. Kongo Gumi proved something almost no one else in history ever has, that a company can be nearly immortal if it stays disciplined enough to keep being exactly what it is. And then, at the very end, it proved the darker half of the same truth, that even a 1,400-year-old company is only ever one confident, borrowed, unnecessary decision away from the end.
The temple at first built in 593 is still standing in Osaka. The company that built it is not.